Okay, we're going to do something I don't think I've ever done before in Flashpoint Golan. All these victory games have, at least many of them, have scenario generators. And usually I say, well, I don't really need that because I don't play a game very much. I don't need all the replay. I don't need to kind of randomize things. Let's play through some of the historical and some of the projected, what I assume to or presume to be the more interesting scenarios that they've already kind of settled for some balance. This one may not quite fit that mold. The two campaign scenarios that are in here look significantly smaller than the random scenario generator system. So, Duel for the Golan is I haven't really looked at these too hard. It's sort of one of these setups. You're going to be fighting the Syrians over the heights after a breakdown in negotiations, the Oslo Accords, whatever. That was not resolved, that part, the Golan section. But Syria never went to war directly against Israel again there, and that kind of makes sense. It's tough. I mean, Israel's got a hell of a military, and given the fact that they managed to defeat Jordan, Syria, and Egypt regularly in the past, it's pretty tough to make a convincing argument that Syria or Jordan, or them together, would make an attack without Egyptian support. And that's actually pretty much what this game does postulate. So, what we've seen is an unwillingness to launch those kind of attacks. Fire in the East is going to be similar to the scenario that we played over here, where you're going to have PLO instances that kind of trigger the whole situation. Now, there's a possibility of Syrian intervention coming in to help with it as well, but it's going to be a broad, full map game. I've played these scenarios, at least one of them, I think the Duel for Golan, but maybe both of them, I'm not sure. And the problem, of course, is the overall system. One thing I want to mention from the last time I played, somehow I kind of cheated in favor of the Arabs. They managed to kind of steal units from the 7th Division into the 5th Division for that initial attack that got me the win, basically. As I was sorting my units out, I noticed the 7th was all kind of intermingled with the 5th and with the 10th, and didn't really have a coherent formation of its own, which is important, because the bigger your formation, the more you can do with it. And when you pick a chit, if you don't have, a very large formation, which the Syrians don't, you probably will end up having a harder time doing stuff. So it might have taken one formation to take this hill and one formation to take this tell, and with that interference in between, it's possible, unlikely though, that the Israelis would have been able to react. I just had the Israelis. It's hard to cover all the terrain for the Israelis. That's the real problem. I should have left more weakness back here, where then the main division, the Moshe division, could have attacked to regain terrain without giving up. It had to redeploy down here, and that just did not work within the scenario parameters, because other units could have filled in the gap. The other Syrian units could have grabbed territory at no cost. Okay, so let's go to what we're looking at. We're looking at the scenario generator system, and instead of, you can just preset these. I'm doing one thing that's a little different, which is somewhat suggested, which is, hey, at the time this game was written, it wasn't known what was going to happen in terms of the West Bank and the Golan Heights. Well, now we more or less know the West Bank is no longer occupied by the Israeli military directly. Because of that situation, I'm going to use the option that demilitarizes the West Bank, which means the Israeli units won't be allowed to deploy starting there. It also changes Jordan's victory conditions. so that they have to reach for more intense ones, because basically freeing the West Bank, I think, is their lower level victory conditions. The Golan Heights, though, they've still kept. It's just too strategic a position. And then what we do, let's see what we do. So the first thing we do is we have to randomly determine a scenario. Now this doesn't actually have to be done. You could pick one. But we're going to roll a die and see what it is. And that's going to be the core sort of triggering event for the war. Let's see what we get. We get 5. Baath Party Unification. Following the ouster of Saddam Hussein, the Baath, Pan-Syrian, Pan-Arab parties of Syria and Iraq. Hey, this is beginning to sound kind of like ISIS, except different. Unite to attack Israel and recapture all the occupied territories. So we're going to have Syria and Iraq versus Israel. Their superiority starts at neutral. I'll make it brown because that'll confuse me. We're going to have a mobilization progress. We've already gotten a certain level of mobilization in place. So the setup is going to be based on that. We're 5 turns into mobilization. This is a delayed hostilities scenario, which is kind of cool because the war doesn't start right away. Now, we also have to deal with things like UN intervention possibility demanding, say, a ceasefire or something. And the players can ignore that if they wish, but that hurts them in terms of victory conditions. Arab League posture modifier, USA posture modifier, and then the initiative is there. We're going to have a momentum of +10 for this. Now, we don't know how many airstrikes there are because we roll on this one for each turn. So, these posture modifiers are going to be used here to combine a die roll here for what posture we're looking at versus the US posture, which is determined through 3 die rolls. And of course, there's also the USSR posture as well. Let's see how those work. I'm trying to see what we're supposed to do here in terms of order. First, we look at the US posture, and we make 3 die rolls. Which I guess will be on here. One each for executive, legislative, and media. Do we track those each exclusively? I gotta write some of these things down. Got some information from the scenario card that I need to put down, and I'm gonna have to erase some stuff, so I'll back away for a bit. I've never understood completely why they do this, breaking it into 3 different types of posture, but the US is going to have a modifier +2 to every one of their die rolls. So we look to see what the executive branch feels. And a +2 is a 9. It's going to be a hawk. So that's +1. The legislative, a +2 is 9. It's hawk. That's +2. And now the US media at 7 is going to be moderate. So our total posture for the US is +2, which I believe is interventionist, aggressive. But I have to look that up over here. Yes, +2 or greater is aggressive. It can't go higher. So I'm going to write that in here. Yes, they are aggro. Now the Arab League, they have their modifier from the scenario, which is going to be +1. Make a roll on their chart. They get a 10. That's just moderate. This is not a very violent scenario in terms of the spirit. I think it should be higher, but we'll keep going. USSR modifier is on the USSR modifier table, completely random. They are in political collapse. That is not their intervention level. Where do they go here? I don't know where to put them. Okay. Shit. Now, how do we mesh these? We're going to see the climate from the two primary players in the Middle East, the Arab League and the United States. Cross-reference the policies, the postures determined in step number 2. Define one of the 9 boxes. Okay, so we've got an aggressive U.S. versus this. The aggressive U.S. response means the U.S. is going to veto any ceasefire against Israel. Which means no resolution. It says USSR 1. We'll see if that gets modified somehow. USA intervention is 3. Yeah, we don't like ISIS, right? This is the caliphate here, no? And the Arab level is going to be 1. They might be willing to take advantage of the situation, but maybe not willing to totally work together. Now let's see what this all means. Level 1 means no intervention. The Arab League is staying out of this. Now, in the scenario that I'm kind of postulating, the Arab League, if anything, is probably anti this Iraq-Syria coalition, but we'll leave it be. Because we're playing something that's halfway between make-believe and maybe, we don't have the forces updated for today anyway, so it's not like we can do that. One of the intervention levels has a double star. It's reduced. So USSR 1 is going to be no intervention. That's fine. I don't think... Okay, so we can ignore the UN resolutions. The intervention, if the Israeli attacks any units in a non-intervening Arab nation or traces movement into any hex within its borders, including helicopters, then that nation will declare war. So I can't go into those. So that's fine. The U.S. is at aerial intervention, which means we'll be looking at when that begins and then adding airstrikes to support that. We're not up to a ground intervention. That's an option which is possible. If there's not a real risk, we're willing to throw troops in, I guess. So I think did we get all prior levels? That's not clear. The effects are cumulative, so if level 3, level 2 happens, okay. So we've got aerial, we have special munitions resupply. So we're going to be creating a die roll in half worth of Israeli supplies in place. Up to 10 points. Okay. Time for a little break, but then we go into the pre-war game turns. We have to look at the rules for that. Note that USSR modifier that I couldn't figure out what it's for. that is subtracted from the Arab League posture, so we would have, I think we rolled a 5, so we actually go to passive here. Which just means we're not going to see easy effects, but that means the USA intervention level is 4, so they're going to provide less. They'll throw ground troops in, which is cool, but they're going to provide less special munitions to the Israelis. And everything else stays the same there. Okay, well, this is about most of the way through the physical setup. Israeli forces, some of them are actually, well, the South Lebanese army has a little bit of that Lev unit in it. You can see Lebanon is kind of penetrated by Syrian forces. These are pro-Syrian Lebanese. These are pro-Israeli Lebanese, the South Lebanese army. Elsewhere, well, I had to kind of fudge things because of the West Bank. Normally, when you'd have the West Bank, one division can hold kind of all the roadways here along with maybe the territorial brigades. I can't block the roadways to Jordan after having given up the West Bank with just one division. And that's kind of, as well as block the West Bank roadways, which I feel is actually probably more required. I'm going to still provide the same general situation, which is that I'm going to expect there to be a single garrison along the Jordan West Bank borders, whatever that amounts to. You can see all the different commands that are in play already, and actually there are more. Iraq's got these forces that are coming on the board during, I guess, the reinforcement phase. Now, they were supposed to kind of come in piecemeal, one every couple of turns for mobilization, but I'm at mobilization +5 instantly, and I'm not quite sure what that means. I still have to work out the log sheet and write down all the information on all these different commands. I'm hoping it all fits on one log sheet, because it will be a pain in the ass if I have to flip between multiple. I think I have a scenario where I was using 2 different log sheets though, so it might be It might be the fact that I have to have one log sheet for the Israelis and one for the Arabs. Not positive, because I've only got one Arab foe here. Well, 2 with Iraq in there. I could just count these chits and see. Although there are territorial units and such that I have to write down as well. I drag my feet like mad in something like this, setting it up, getting ready, because, well, one, it's a pain in the ass to set up. There were cases where there are towns listed here, Israeli towns. I've got no idea of some of the names of things like Kiryat Motzkin. Never heard of it. You know, I know where Haifa is. I know a couple of major things where the hex number's not given. And there was one case, I think some of these artillery here, I couldn't find the town it went to, so I put it there because I don't know that town either. It starts with a Kiryat. It's not that one. There are a number of them in there. And once I had most of my counters on the map, I couldn't figure out where the hell it was supposed to go. So I, in one case, added the hex number for a town, but then kind of forgot to be useful for the next time I play. The setup for this scenario is the setup for all of the random generated scenarios, more or less. There are units like this which are not mobilized yet. There are no rules on that I could find on what it means to mobilize an Israeli unit. I just kind of said, well, it appears within a couple of hexes of the headquarters when mobilization occurs. But most of the mobilization is through already. We're still not in a conflict situation, though. That could change on the first turn. At the beginning of the first turn, I roll a die to see whether or not it goes into conflict situation. All right. Well, unfortunately for me, the single log sheet was not effective enough, so I've got it on 2 sides of the pad. Let's talk a little bit about what we got. All the Israeli divisions are going to be first line, except the, well, these aren't divisions, the 35th and 55th paratroop brigades are elite units. Some of the ancillary units, artillery has a base morale of 5 for all scenarios. The South Lebanese and territorials have a 4. The 202 Airborne has a 7, which puts it well into the elite category. The U.S. forces are all elite. We're just talking the 6th Marine and 82nd Airborne. It would be pretty unreasonable to call them anything but. Special munitions, Israel starts out with 20 and is going to get a die roll divided by 3 each turn because the U.S. is actually involved with ground troops. U.S. gets 5 special munitions each turn. Headquarters replacement, is basically 1 per 2 turns for both countries. Every odd number turn they get a point. Up until a certain point. So the Israelis get a maximum of 12 headquarters replacement points, and the U.S. gets a maximum of 5. I think that's if a headquarters is completely destroyed, though, so that's not something that you use much. On the Syrian side, most of their army is reserve. We have a couple of first-line units, including, luckily for me, the thing I'm spearheading with, the 3rd Armored here. It looks like a good unit, which is why it's positioned to try to blast through where I was successful last time. Now I'm facing a lot more here. Plus, if things don't start on the first turn, the Israelis have a chance to move a whole nother division into place there. It's going to be really rough to get through the Golan Heights if there's any time to deploy at all. I don't know how much potential the Arabs have of making any leeway, of making any gains here. Their forces are so much inferior. Yemen, if they come in, the artillery are 5. Special forces are 6. PLO 4. PLO guerrillas are 3. PLO have a special capability, which, strangely enough, isn't in the scenario that I played before because they didn't have this kind of capability at that time, actually. But in the era that this is covering, they became a much more effective guerrilla operation. So anytime you move within a couple of hexes of them, they get a chance at an ambush, which I believe is a type of strike. I'm not playing with the special forces rules, so I didn't really look that up, but an ambush causes additional operation points to be spent to move through that area. So that's going to be, improvised munition, improvised explosives and stuff like that to hinder, as well as raids, to hinder the movement and deployment of the Israeli forces in that area. I lost my chart. Now, some of this I may forget as I'm going because there's just so much here. See what else we have. For munitions, Syria and Iraq each have a stockpile of munitions. Iraq's is very small because this was designed in the period, when it was obvious that they had not managed to turn over all their weaponry to the inspectors. It doesn't really limit the munitions, so you can use whatever you like for them. So you could end up dropping minefields. You could be doing multi-missile launches, stuff like that, rocket-propelled artillery. What's not included is any kind of chemical warfare or anything like that, which, of course, is what was actually being particularly restricted. And Syria gets 1 headquarters unit per turn, or 1 headquarters replacement per turn for, I think, the first dozen turns. So a little bit more replenishment capability. I guess the first thing we do is the Arabs are going to have momentum. So presumably I get to pick a unit. Is that the first? Yeah, I think that happens during the ops cycle. So the real first thing is the political stage where we roll on here and see, hey, what's happening? And we get a 0, which is crisis stabilized, hostilities commence. What does that mean? Well, it seems to not mean hostilities commence. The crisis stabilized, mobilization continues onward. Each nation can move one formation up to 6 ops points. Moving units cannot enter UN or enemy-controlled territory. We're not going to have any units can reorganize and have ammo replenished. Yeah, big deal. We're not going to have any kind of airstrikes or anything like that. That's the next level up. The crisis deepens. Hostilities commences where the game actually starts. Now, as you can see, that only happens 1 out of every 10 turns. So we're going to see a lot of buildup here. And notably, I got to worry about, hey, do I want to bring the Iraqis on the board yet? It's each nation, so I can pull 1 unit on. Theoretically, those should already be on the board, but there's no rules for setting up stuff that's mobilized, but it starts off board. And otherwise, you know, I can move a Syrian unit up towards the front, but the Israelis are going to be able to throw more troops into the Golan Heights. I don't think they're going to be allowed to throw additional forces into Lebanon. That would strike me as a little beyond the level. And other than that, the rest of this is not necessary. I'm not going to be jamming. We'll see reinforcement. That would be considered an attack. The rest of the operations, largely, other than the reinforcements, are really nothing. So we're going to have a really fast first turn, but it just kind of helps us get to the deployment stage of the game. I think the Arab side has to make its choice as to which unit it's going to pick to move, and I'm assuming first, and then I assume that, I don't know, there's no rules for using chit pull or anything like that for this, so I really don't know. I guess each nation will throw a chit into play or something, into the cup, and I'll handle it that way. So replacement munitions and headquarters points, those only happen after war starts. Likewise, the United States only actually enters after war starts. But what I have to worry about here is I have to start looking because there's mobilizations for each of these units. So for example, the Israelis have a mobilization on the +6 turn. But this starts on +5, so next turn I'd have to check another one. I've already taken care of the mobilization for the +5 turn. Okay, fair enough. So I guess I do some quick movement, and I'll come back, show you what happened with everybody's movement, and then I guess we'll roll to see whether we have a war yet next turn. After some time, we might start seeing, you know, a peace chance, right? Now, I kind of lied, I'm not quite ready. I pulled out the Tarawaka unit. I don't think I can bring in the Iraqi headquarters, even though they mobilize at the same time, because it's not part of this command. But I want this command to come in first. Now, I'm thinking, wow, I'd like to do my strategic movement, you know, my rapid movement along the roads. I haven't done rapid movement yet, but remember, there's a morale check when you do that, unless you use tank transporters. And it just happens that the amount of units I have exactly meets the capability for this unit. So I think I can tank transport the whole thing and thus avoid that problem. So for the first time, we're going to see the strategic movement, which is what? That's simply a faster rate on the travel. So for example, on the highways, instead of paying a quarter, I pay a fifth of a movement point per hex that I'm moving. That's cool. Taking a look at the rules on the tank transporters, I was a little mistaken. It doesn't cost on a per unit basis. It allows you to move the whole division for one functional point. So I was a little worried because the Vardy command, which I've pulled, I moved the PLO, shifted a couple of their forces up towards the front, mainly for that ambush capability to interfere and hinder any Israeli incursions into Lebanon there. I'm less defensible where I am, but I want to throw my assets in where they can actually have an effect. Israel, I didn't go over the victory conditions. Israel cares about Lebanon, but I think they're more concerned with defending themselves right now and then turning the tide once they break the attack. So I figure it's important for me to kind of fling forward and not just allow them to kind of easily, say, outflank the 8th Armored, which is sitting over there in Lebanon, ready to hit them from behind. So, anyway, what was I... Yeah, why don't I go into the victory conditions, I guess. There was something else I wanted to talk about. But anyway, we got the Iraqis made it up to there with their quick movement. Okay, what are our victory conditions? The victory conditions are the same for this scenario. Well, it depends on who the aggressor is and what countries are in place. So for the example, the Syrians are on an offensive, and to get a major victory or a major victory, they need different things. I'm assuming this is minor. 20 hexes in the Golan Heights and 2 Israeli towns. 50 hexes in the Golan Heights and an Israeli city or airport. Or having a unit in the Mediterranean coast and 2 cities and or major airports. That would be a pretty massive attack. I'm looking to try to get as much, as far as I can, but I don't want to. I want to try to guarantee some sort of victory to begin with. We're not worried about Jordanians. We're not worried about Arab defensive, nor Israeli offensive. We're worried about Israeli defensive, which are primarily to prevent the Arabs from getting what they want. However, we can get a decisive victory if we manage any of the Israeli offensive conditions. Against Syria, the limited is 15 Syrian towns, with the Syrian summit of Mount Hermon counting as 5. This counts as 5 hexes for the Syrians. That counts as 5 towns for the Israelis. And drive all Syrian and Lebanese units out of Lebanon south of the 0008 hex row, which is quite far up there, actually. We have to get up to here. But there's not a lot there, so that might be plausible. Well, I'm assuming it kind of is. The Israeli force just seems so potent. I stepped away and immediately had a thought. What you may have noticed is that these victory conditions are not dependent on the starting conditions. So the fact that the Arab League is not all attacking Israel at once, hey, no worries, man. Still same victory conditions. They're the strategic goals. That's all. You're not being assessed based on the situation. Part of me kind of wants to say, hey, that's not really fair. And as a game, no, it isn't. You might be able to make more balanced or unbalanced scenarios. So, for example, if Jordan was crossing on the West Bank and attacking at the same time, wow, that would change situations significantly. This should be much, much easier for Israel to handle in that situation. If the U.S. wasn't going to get involved, if Russia was throwing support in, all these things would make a difference. It makes sense that Russia's not throwing support in, though, if this is that kind of ISIS scenario that I was putting forward. But, certainly it would, the Soviets would provide some level of support to Assad if he were to make some sort of attack. They have in the past. Much more for the end of the turn. The Israelis pushed a division into place here, and the Arabs threw an extra division up here for the attack. Silly me. There's a section that describes mobilization. It's in an adjacent hex. That's pretty close to what I did. I think I allowed a 2-hex extension, but it's essentially the same thing. The units can't move the turn they mobilize, and I think they happen during the reinforcement phase, but I would have to see if that's clarified here. Yeah, it must be. What they say is they happen during a mobilization and reinforcement phase. Well, that's not spelled out in the base sequence of play. Maybe there's another one hidden in here, but I don't think so. Whatever. So essentially we're on another roll for the turn to see if the game actually starts yet. And no, it doesn't. So we get some more reinforcements coming in, and again, that's going to be another Iraqi unit sliding up, probably another Syrian unit, and at this point the Israelis get to pull some stuff up. We're on turn 6, so there are going to be some more activations taking place. We look at the mobilization schedule, and we get a division in the 3rd Artillery Brigade. Well, I'm gonna throw these guys down where they're supposed to come. It doesn't really help to follow through all this in too much detail. It just wastes video and your time, and that's something that I'd rather not do. So I'm forcing reinforcements to come on using a chit pull. I actually reversed my decision and brought the Syrian 3rd Corps headquarters into play for last turn, and we got another division pulling in. One more division's left for the Syrians. Assad moved his guards into play here, and well, the Israelis got an extra division as well, which is now up into this area, and that took their chip pull to actually move it onto the board so that they couldn't throw more forces into the heights. I just don't want reinforcements piling up off board, and I feel like I shouldn't be allowed to move multiple commands at once. Puts us on another one then. I guess the exciting thing is, when do we roll a 9? Well, a 5 or higher is interesting, actually. Alright, that puts us on turn 7, and there is more stuff coming in here. And instead of bringing the aerial division into play, I moved a big strike force, the Vardy division, up here. This is where the weakness is. Hey, I saw it in the last playthrough, right? It's where they're putting some of their heaviest forces. I wanna fill that in a little more before I start bringing piles of reinforcements in. As it stands, I'm not even getting the units that have already moved on or that are close by onto the field. So given the way I'm doing things, I figure the Israelis need to kind of fill in the gaps a little better than they have. You can see all of the Iraqi armies on the board. Most of the Syrian army is onto these guys. Drove up through here to get into play there, using those tank transporters. It's really not, I've been worrying about stacking, but honestly it's not that big a deal when I'm doing these behind the lines movement, because the units that I'm moving forward are, I can move them forward one unit at a time. It's not like they need to be stacked together to fight. One thing I want to point out, I didn't handle this in the last game, and I want to try to remember it in this. All the bridges along here are blown. Basically, these tank traps, you can't, or tank entrenchments, you can't cross them by the roads. And I think I cheated a little bit last time, but that's something to keep in mind. I don't want to put counters down all over them. There's just too many roads to cover that way. I think if any of those get repaired, I'm going to try to remember that in opposition. Since there's nothing going on over on the West Bank in Jordan, I'm not going to worry about whether or not these bridges are in existence. I don't want to think about that too much. We'll assume a certain level of peacefulness exists there. Probably unwarranted, but okay. Think about my brain. I was wondering, this crisis stabilized, hostilities commence. I bet you they intended for, if you get the crisis deepens, the hostilities start. But I read this paragraph. I ignore this big exception. It's too bold. It blares out. So it just filters out of my mind. That's how my brain works. I don't know, you can't really complain about something like that. I'm just looking in terms of the rule book, but I'm looking at how my brain works and saying, wow, that's kind of interesting. You highlight something. I've gotten so used in war games to highlighted stuff being garbage that you discard. It's either historical notes or clarifications or something like that you can usually skim over without looking for. So here I was specifically looking for it, and yeah, now I see. It is indeed the way I looked at it. So let's start another turn. I'm using a little counter right now, but I'm out of points for that. So far we've seen nothing except the stabilize. But boom, we go right to hostilities. That doesn't usually happen, as you can see in the chart. You know, most of the time you get that crisis deepens, which is going to allow airstrikes and stuff, but bang, we go to war right away. That means we're going to start playing right away. Like full on, as with the other scenarios. So we got our initiative. This was the political. Air superiority. We do have to check this. We've not done this yet in a single game. So, where's the chart? Here it is. Jordan is the only... there's not Soviet. There's not... U.S. aerial intervention is in play. Let me make sure that it's immediately available, though. Not until D+2. Okay. So the Arabs get kind of a little bit of first strike here. So we roll a die, and we see which way it goes. We get an 8, that's going to be down a box. We're getting to Arab superiority here. So it kind of makes sense that they would get that surprise attack, but there was nothing guaranteed here with this build-up and everything. Alright, we do have more reinforcements coming in this turn. And I'm going to put aerial over here. So I remember, oh my god, look at all this. This turn is going to take forever. Oh boy. Alright. We've got some reinforcements coming in. Oh, jeez. We're going to have jamming that I have to take account of. So both sides get to do that. And they'll be trying to knock out things. I got to think real hard about all this. Off thinking a little bit. We're on the Arab 1. The Israelis get a half a die. Which way is it rounded? Round up. So they get 4 airstrikes. Syria gets a whole die. They're going to get 7 airstrikes. Iraq gets half a die. They get 5 airstrikes. Yay. Something else we haven't had to do yet. No idea on the jamming though. First time we've seen something. So the Iraqi 3rd Corps disrupted the Mordecai unit's headquarters. I'm looking at, I think I got to attack to the north instead of the south because the Israelis were able to coordinate heavily there. So I want to soften this up a little so that everything can hit it. Then I decided to go for the CENTCOM, or the NORCOM, with the Syrians High Command. For the first time I had a failed roll, not less than a 6. That means that one, I don't shut down the Israelis' ability to jam, but also I've detected this. And now I can do an airstrike against it and try to knock out the capability, or at least reduce the capabilities of the Syrian command. That seems like a good idea. Is it a vital one? I don't know. Let's use a ballistic missile. And they'll use an anti-ballistic off their own. And let's see if they succeed. And I really shouldn't go into this much detail here. The anti-ballistic is going to be a 3 or less. And I prevent their reaction from doing any good. On to more jams. Okay, and our reinforcements, other than... I don't know if I fell behind or what, but I have an extra unit that I hadn't mobilized out of the Israelis that I think should be, that was on the board. Maybe there was a misprint, or maybe I missed something. We've got another division of Syrians coming in, and then we have one more unit. This is a Yemeni brigade here that comes in at an airport. Now, you might argue with my little fantasy of this being the Caliphate. The Yemenis don't really make sense, but we can say that that's some sort of specialized force. I don't know what to call it. I don't want to throw... I think the Arabs are going to have a pretty hard time in this scenario. They're facing a real uphill battle. I don't want to deprive them of something that was baked into the scenario. So we'll give them that little mechanized unit, which they can include in their other commands. It only gets to move once or twice, depending on, it gets attached to a command like other loose units do. All right, where are we? There's not going to be any replenishment. So now the Arabs get to pick a unit to activate as their automatic, and they get to... and I don't know which one I'm going to take. I want to make a good hit to begin with, but I just don't know. And then the rest of this whole pile goes into the cup. And I'm dreading what this is all going to be like. Alright, well, I made my decision to start with the Syrian 3rd Armor and look over and say, okay, I'm going to make myself some set piece attacks. This one here, it's kind of cool. I get the flanking attack, and here I think I'm going to attack across here as well. I'm just going across a wadi, so it's not too bad, and that's a weak little territorial unit. Great. And then I start to realize everything that's in range of this. And this is what terrifies me about the OCS game. So obviously, something like Reluctant Enemies, or the one that I played, Burma, it's got to be kicking around down there somewhere. I don't know where that is. Are fairly reasonable games. I got Burma up here. But when I looked at something along the lines, not the big East Front ones, because there's a lot of space there that maybe you can, kind of divide the map up more easily. But when I look at something in particular like Blitzkrieg Legend over here, and I'm sorry about the light, I just don't want to move things too much, and I probably shouldn't even look, but this is what I imagine it's going to be like. That I'm making a decision in a situation where I've just got so much I can throw in. So if I make these set piece battles, I can throw all the artillery that's here into play. I haven't degraded the headquarters. I'm not allowed to. The jamming is limited to 1 per headquarters. I could have shot at this one instead of going for the big one. That probably would have been wise, but it wouldn't have mattered anyway. I would have gotten the same results, right? So, geez, what do I do? I got no idea. I'll try to play it out as best as I can. I don't know if I want to, I probably want to throw all my artillery in. That's one bonus here. I don't have to worry about ammunition in this game, except for the special munitions. So I can just chuck whatever I like in there and hope that I don't run out of ammo, because if I get a bad roll, I'm screwed in that sector until I can do an ammo resupply at, I think that's in the replenish and reorg phase that you're allowed to spend in, and a headquarters factor for that. So at least there's that I can just say, well, it's all going in, but I got 2 different battles to throw it into, and I've got to decide where to split. And likewise with the Arabs, I have to make that decision. I don't think this is going to go well for the Arabs, though. There's a lot of Israeli artillery within range. In addition to other things, I'm sliding an attack helicopter in to try to provide some defensive support here. Now, I only have a couple of these, and I got to be careful. I only get 1 reaction per turn with them. I can use them each time their formation, whatever I declare that to be, is activated. There's not an easy way to decide what their formation is in that sense. So they may not get a lot of support just because they're not in range of anything, except for the overall command right now. They're not really close enough, having to be based at a headquarters. I could, though, say throw them down here to the El airport, and that would provide, that would be within range of some of these smaller headquarters so I could attach it to one of them instead. Right now it's unattached. It's just doing a reactive strike, I guess. I don't know. I think it has to be attached to something, which means right now it's attached to Northcom because that's the only thing that has the range to call in the strike. So, and then I could do it, it only gets one defensive. The problem here is these things are vulnerable, not to getting shot, it seems. From what I can tell here, they just get driven away. They get aborted by air defense fire. Now let me see. Maybe it tells me a little bit more down here. It's got a chance of... No. Yeah, it's gonna be reduced a level of morale too, but anyway. The chance of hitting it is fairly low because this guy's disrupted, so commit the third to another. This was some air defense. So now the chance of that hitting is actually just 1. Syrian air defense here for a regular division is an S1. So I'd need a 0 or a 1, but I've got an extra point because of the modifier. So I've got some chance at hitting it. Ooh, and it's also got proximity, which is another -2. So there's -3 to the die roll. That makes it fairly likely, actually. But that's not going to do. So now the helicopter is present here for the attack that I'm planning. Result of this attack was a good one for the Arabs, mainly because of the flanking attack. They had 2-to-1 odds, which isn't terrible. Actually, they had better than 2-to-1, but I don't think that matters now. There's a 1.5 to 1 and 1 to 1.5, but nothing in between here. So this is going to have to retreat, and I've taken the hex. Now, this is a small battle on an unimportant area, which I think means it's worth nothing. I have to look that up. Let's see what we got here. I think this is worth no. And I don't remember where you get, how much you get morale from. So if it's a small battle, all other terrain, yeah, it's still worth a point. Okay, so I get a point of momentum. And I want to check the troop quality. There's a short-term or a long-term troop quality bonus. And I haven't been paying attention to that, but I don't remember. It's got to be at least 4 momentum points. Or if a headquarters is eliminated, or if a formation is eliminated. Okay. Also, the helicopter took a step loss in this as well, off its morale. And that's going to return back. We're going to pull away, and there'll be a breakthrough there with a possible pursuit. During the reaction, or the exploitation phase, get these out of here. Things didn't go quite as well for the Arabs. We actually lose a point of momentum because the Israelis won the fight their weight. Is it the losing force that determines the size of the battle? Quite possibly. This is going to be the first loss on an attack, I think. Yeah. So that's more than 2 brigades. That's going to be a large battle. So that was actually worth 4 points. 1, 2, 3, 4. This goes down. Now that's problematic because 4 points is where things get important. And what ends up happening is the Golani unit, and I don't know how high it can go, 7 or 8 or whatever, gets morale up to a 6, and my 3rd armored goes down to a 5. Basically, I tried to do a meeting engagement here instead of a set-piece battle with the thought of, well, after I do that and drive those guys off, who I outnumber tremendously, I'd be able to, you know, position myself where maybe I can give some support to the first armored coming in when it gets its attack. Maybe. Yeah, that didn't happen. Instead, I got stopped in my tracks, and bad things happened to my morale in a way that we haven't seen yet in the game. Alright, that's one activation in the first turn. There's only this many more chits. Not all of them are going to be as big a deal as this one, but quite a few of them will be. I'd say, you know, we've got like at least 3 or 4 big attack type things. And this takes a good, you know, if I get the pace down, maybe 20 minutes for an attack or something. So it's going to be days on this first turn for me at the rate that I like to play. So I'm going to load this one up, because I'm almost out of video anyhow.